Good evening, dear audience, dear students, dear colleagues. My name is Marie Glaser, and I'm directing the ETH Center for Research, Architecture, Society and the Built Environment at the LUS, Landscape and Urban Studies Institute of the Department of Architecture at ETH Zurich. I'm glad and I'm very happy to welcome you to the first event of the Athena lecture series at our department. We already planned to start the lectures live in April, but then, COVID came, we had to postpone, the story. Now, today, we're happy to have everything prepared for doing this as an online event, which will be recorded for those who cannot attend or cannot fully take part today. At the same time, the Athena Lectures today is the keynote event of the 5th edition of the Parity Talks at our Department of Architecture, a yearly symposium surrounding issues of gender equality and diversity within architecture and the planning disciplines. For and on behalf of the Parity Group, let me give you now a brief introduction to this event, which will take place tonight and tomorrow. The first talks in 2016 started out raising a genuine concern within the school, which resulted in demands framed as 9 points for parity, a roadmap. 5 years on, it appears the slow pace of institutional change has brought us back to these beginnings, with the 5th Parity Talks being titled Actions and Accountability. How can we determine productive ways forward, formulate actions towards parity and diversity, and define accountability? In a situation of continued support for the efforts laid out by the Parity Group, but a lack of actual tangible change, support runs the risk of being reduced to mere tokenism. It is clear that institutional change is demanded. Tonight, with the opening lecture of Marwa Al Sabouni, and tomorrow with the lecture program in the morning and workshops in the afternoon, we are seeking to fortify our efforts and reiterate what has been said so many times before. The work largely carried out by assistants and students since years needs to be integrated as a routine conversation and a key concern of the school, rather than the yearly one-off event it currently is. And parity and diversity at professoral level, assistance, and within curriculum must become a matter of course. Starting with the Athena evening now, let me tell you some few notes about the history and the character of the Athena lectures. After the model of many universities in the UK, but also in Stockholm at KTH, where I had the chance to listen and to become acquainted with this format of excellent women scholars giving a lecture on her work and engaging in a conversation with students on multiple issues of expertise and experiences in working in architecture and urban research and design. Also with a gender perspective, ETHKs, we proposed to bring these Athena lecture format to our department, and the proposal was successful. We would like to thank here the Office of the President of ETH and the Dean of the Department of Architecture for their support, and also Athena, the goddess of wisdom. In the next years, ETHKs organizes in collaboration with the Parity and Diversity Group a series of lectures by recognized women designers and scholars in the field of urban studies, architecture, urban planning, and landscape studies. This lecture series gives students and faculty an opportunity to engage in a discussion with leading junior and senior faculty, scientists, architects, and professionals. By bringing the brightest minds, the most engaging speakers and influential thinkers to ETH campus, to ETH Hönkeberg, we aim to encourage thought-provoking conversations and genesis of ideas. The invited guests present her scholarly and creative research in a public lecture. It is followed then by a conversation with moderators and an open Q&A session where there is opportunity for students and the audience to further engage with the lecturer. Today, I'm very glad to welcome former Professor of Architecture and Design here at ETH, Marc Angelil, with me in the conversation with Marwa. He will join us later. In fall 2019, we organized an open voting for all students and faculty here at the department to nominate their most preferred candidates for these lectures. Marwa Al Sabouni received a major lot of votes. We contacted her and she was very pleased to hear that students and faculty selected her as one of the speakers of the Athena lectures, and she accepted. Just shortly, Marwa is an architect, academic, urban thinker from Homs in Syria. She holds a PhD in architectural design, and she is the author of the acclaimed book, The Battle for Home. Her writings lead you through the history and present of Homs, its planning and architectural history, its communities and social history, and its devastating destruction during war. What I appreciate very highly is Marwa's approach of reflecting on space as a complex intertwining of social and built space. She concentrates on how to reconstruct the city, even with the war still going on, integrating social, historical, and economic factors in her thinking. So thank you for being with us today, Marwa, via Skype. I will share my screen with Marwa now.
Thank you so much, Marie, for this kind introduction.
Wait. Can I do this? Bildschirm?
Yes, you can.
Bildschirm freigeben? Der Host hat die Freigabe. I think we need a moment because I can't share my... Okay, now I can share it. Yes.
Are we on?
Now we can share. Yeah, you're on. Take the word, Marwa.
Well, thank you so much, Marie, for this kind introduction and for the invitation to take part. And I want to say hello to everyone, although I don't see everybody, but I just, I'm so honored to be taking part, and I wish I would have been there in person. It's so nice to be speaking to you, everybody, and I'm very honored to be taking part in the Athena lecture series. And also, I'm so grateful and privileged to have been chosen by you as a first speaker. It means so much to me that you are interested in my work. As many of you may know, as Marie mentioned, I live in Homs in Syria, and hence the technical challenges that Marie and the ETH team were so kindly and nicely had collaborated to make this happen. So thank you so much, everybody, for making this happen. And the reason I'm speaking via Skype, channeling to Zoom, is related to my whereabouts, to my location, because Zoom is banned here in Syria by as part of the US sanctions, as part of the ongoing war here. So we are hoping and crossing our fingers that everything will go smoothly. And the lecture is recorded for you, which will be shared in a moment. I want just to give you like a short brief about what the lecture is going to be about. It's of course based on the ideas that I discuss in the book, in The Battle for Home, basically on the premise of the role of architecture in creating war, or vice versa, contributing to peace. But in the lecture, I try to give more detail and go broader than the themes discussed in the book. So those who read the book may find elaboration about certain areas. I discuss examples from my city, Homs, but I also compare it to examples in neighboring country, in Lebanon, which had initiated reconstruction in earlier decades. What I try to do in the lecture, that try to look at the city from from a lens that divided it into 4 components. So when you listen to the lecture, you will see that there are 4 components that I divided the city into, and in those 4 components, I try to make the case of comparing what had worked in a context that used architecture as a tool of creating social cohesion and settlement for people, and compare it to what had not worked, which examples that led to destruction and war. So without further ado, let me hand you over to Marie, who will share the lecture with you, and I'll wait here for the Q&A to engage with you, and so please enjoy the lecture.
Hello and a very warm welcome to the students of ETH Zurich. It's my pleasure and honor to be taking part in the Athena lecture series. My lecture is about the role of architecture in war, and the title is Building for War: How Architecture Played a Role in the Syrian Conflict. I'll be giving you a glance at the architectural landscape of Syria, beginning with the ancient history of Syria, because Syria is a place with a very long history of sequence civilizations that have been layered architecturally within the heart of almost every city. It is a place that termed or referred to as the cradle of civilizations, because ancient civilizations like Mary, Ebla, Amorite, Ugarit from the 3rd century BC have their remnants spread over different parts of the country, where the first written alphabet and the oldest music notation were found. Damascus, the capital, and the city of Aleppo are among the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. These old cities are accumulations of different civilizations, some of which belong to the Hellenistic and Roman times, but the most recent layer, which manifested itself in the shape of houses, monuments, souks, generally belongs to many different architectural styles, containing the remnants of past old architecture within its newest built iteration. Like in many parts of the world, of course, the old part and the old cores developed a new and modern part next to it, which resulted in 2 different characters in each city: the new and modern center next to the old center, which we refer usually as the old city. Those cities, the old cores, had, of course, unique qualities, namely the long-lived coexistence of different religions and backgrounds. They accommodated from thousands and thousands of years. Syrians have experienced the prosperity of open trade and sustainable communities as a result, and they've enjoyed the true meaning of belonging to a place that cultivated a rich life of tolerance and peace. And that was reflected in the built environment. As you see in the picture, the mosques and churches were built back to back. The interwoven souks and public spaces, the proportions and sizes based on principles of humility and harmony, and so on. But this model of peace started to change. Gradually, Syrians were no longer able to recognize connections among each other. Societies began to drift apart, and in those ruptures, antagonism and social illnesses started to slip. Not only the social structure was altering, though, the city on the whole was changing face. In place of thriving places of production, spaces of exchange, and coherently built dwellings, the city turned into a derelict old town next to flamboyant centers, vacant development projects, and overwhelming number of slums which we refer here locally as informalities. Before too long, the inevitable explosion took place. The war that has been raging since 2011 now had a scale that harvested about 1 million of lives, but also enormously devastated the economy and society. According to UN reports, 13 million people in Syria today require humanitarian need, and in recent reports, 83% of the Syrian population live below the poverty line. 69% of people now live in extreme poverty, and nearly 7 million of those numbers of those people are children who live in poverty. 6.3 million are internally displaced, or IDPs for short. More than 1/3 of the 6 million youth inside Syria are internally displaced. Over 6.6 million Syrian refugees are scattered over 47 states in the world. About 1/3 of housing stock and 1/2 of health and education facilities are damaged or destroyed. Facing these staggering numbers, the history of Syria as a tolerant, safe, and progress country, of course, stands at odds. So the question is, what has changed? Many reasons could be listed and analyzed, whether political, economic, natural. Of course, many of those are true, but one reason that remains largely overlooked is architecture. So let me begin with explaining architecture as a register. Architecture offers a register of what has worked for inhabitants of a certain place and what has not. By tracking the built register, we can find evidence of what proven to be a successful model of living for people. Because people tend to keep and maintain those successful models for their functionality, beauty, sustainability, and so on. In this manner, they form a relationship with their surroundings that exceeds the mere practicality offered by today's modern social housing projects and the slum shelters that we suffer from here in Syria. I wrote The Battle for Home, my book, during those years of war. And I was living in my city, Homs, which was being under fire for over 5 years. And I discussed in the book the role of architecture in this conflict. And I think that the title of the book declares the area of interest, which is namely home. Because by destroying the sense of home and destroying the sense of belonging to a certain place, we lose attachments that permit us to call this place our home. We turn into floaters in place, which its demise or flourish means pretty much the same for us. The destruction as well as the fulfillment of this sense lies largely in the way our built environment is shaped and organized, namely in what we define as architecture. In order to pin down the two main areas, we tend to lose our sense of attachment and belonging through architecture. We may look at the two scales of architecture, the urban scale and the architectural scale. Urbanism can dictate, for example, the degree to which people encounter each other and communicate with each other as a basis of social relationships, and can consequently affect the nature of social structure in a given context. It also contributes to shaping the economic activity within the urban localities. This important aspect has been explored in the work of course, many scholars, but one of the most, I think, distinguished scholars in this area was Jane Jacobs, the American urban activist who wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities in 1961. Reshaping society and economy was the aim in Syria, was the aim of the French mandate in the 1920 as a consequence of the Sykes-Picot Pact that divided the land of the Levant into, and the divided Ottoman Empire at the time into West-controlled territories. The French had realized at the time that the destruction of the urban fabric corresponded with the destruction of the social fabric, which perfectly served the strategy of divide and conquer. For that reason, they implemented a comprehensive urban colonial strategy, adopting the Haussmann principles, which were used in Paris after the turbulence of 19th century. The wide open streets and the boulevard planning was introduced, and you can see from the plan of Old Damascus, comparing this plan to the plan of the New Damascus introduced by the French. The city's growth was enforced outside of the old city's wall. Then the class division was created by luring the wealthy and rich class into a newly created modern boulevard housing, tailored just for them. Whereas sectarian divisions was encouraged by economic and political favoritism of one sect over the other, and consequently isolating neighborhoods. The strategy wasn't all subtle and nuanced. Captured from above, you can see by this is Damascus captured by an airplane camera, and you can see that Damascus had entire neighborhoods being blown up, and clear outs were made, and complete monuments relocated altogether in different locations in order to thin out the uncontrolled, closely knitted urban fabric. To maintain this effect, building and planning laws and legislations were tailored to fit the task of the so-called modernization of Syrian cities as a form of political control and economic business making. Syria, like all the region, never got rid of the colonial legacy. The burden is weighing over the shape of our cities till this day, and also over their policies. The Syrian government followed very faithfully the drawn-out French plan, to the degree they invited the same French architect from the date of the mandate in the 60s to rework and reshape the Syrian cities and finish the unfinished task that he had started 2 decades before so-called independence. Although the plan hasn't been fully implemented, luckily, the principles of the urban planning still prevail till this day. The upscaled areas that enabled the rich to come out from the modest alleyways and live separately were quickly followed by the 60s socialist urban plan. This plan was used to allow the masses invited from the countryside to settle around each city, closer to their workplace, in the factories and in public institutions. In that sense, the city was dissected into territories instead of neighborhoods. With the new housing demand on the city, old models of slow building and harmonious aesthetics no longer worked. The featureless building block that was built so fast dominated, and wide roads for vehicles replaced nature, and segregated zones for each group replaced the mixed neighborhoods. Each new neighborhood has become an alternative city on its own. You can see examples of the boulevard housing, and those are examples of slum and social housing. Those, of course, this is an example of the informal housing. These neighborhoods have surrounded and still surround the old cores, and each city, even the modern parts. Then, because they continue to sprawl out far away from the city, Segregated as they were, the new sprawls managed to destroy the values which were shaped and lived in the old cities, and cut the ties among people that used to bind communities together within each other and with each place and each city. These divisive and failing transformations continued over time and performing unsuccessful social housing schemes, also expropriation of properties and building factories over agricultural lands and or too close to housing. The results were segregated neighborhoods, hindered local means of production, and destroyed key built and natural features in cities and towns. Now, zooming into the architectural scale, after taking the glance at the urban scale, we can start from the realization that the loss of the aesthetic character and the visual identity of our surroundings contribute to the loss of our sense of belonging. Our sense of home is achieved partly because through providing a collective accomplishment, a sense that we can take pride in this place or this building or this neighborhood. And in the form, for example, great buildings, attractive cities, historic sites, and so on, that those features those features have proved that they could survive over time. They could provide continuity and accomplishment and sense of pride to ourselves, and which we can belong to and call home. Taking pride in this environment and identifying with it is an identification with the values embodied in its accomplishment and the success it represents, which ultimately ensues the preservation and maintenance of it. In order to become home, our built environment should offer two main relationships: belonging and sharing. To belong and share is a physical experience that largely depends on proximity, size, and aesthetics, but also relates to the moralities and ethics embodied in the physicality of our experience. In this sense, the fact that the first areas that erupted in violence in Syria in this war were the informalities, which for me holds a little surprise, to be frank. 40% of the Syrian population before the war lived in those slums or informal areas, which were neighborhoods built informally and illegally outside the regularity plan of each city. They were mostly boxes, as you saw in the pictures, of bare cinder block and cement with bad infrastructure and poor amenities. As informal sprawls, they were located on the peripheral areas around the cities as isolated compartments, which divided people based on labels such as religion, origin, and social class. This has resulted in parallel lives within the life of each city, and were disconnected from communities that established those cities. Those had imaginary borders created by urbanism, alien from the city as a cooperative center, which divided people from what they saw as the other, who lived in that place or this place, but never crossed paths with the other. Today, after displacement, the original percentage of 40% has reportedly increased into 60% of the Syrian population. Unlike slums, though, or informalities, the old cores managed to achieve a different kind of life. They managed to achieve hives for mixed-use function, local production-based economy, combined with This is an example of you could compare the picture of the informality and the picture of the old core. They were places, for, as you can see, for multiple functions, different backgrounds and social classes, where those were interwoven into one fabric. One built in well-considered sense of scale and proportion and details, built with sustainable and resilient building materials and achieving high standards of what we call today passive design techniques or green design. But for them, it was simply good architecture. One might argue that that most of those descriptions may equally apply to many of the world's old heritage locations, which of course is partly true, but I believe what was unique in the case of those old Islamic cities is the layering approach, by which I mean the way they used other civilizations' elements, structures, and techniques within their new outcome. As mentioned, most of the evident parts in the old cities belong to the Ottoman era, some to the Mamluk and some to the Ayyubid Islamic styles, but amazingly you will find also elements belonging to Hellenistic and Roman styles incorporated within those structures. These elements were embodiments of what we term as urban fabric. And this means an act of interweaving people as well as of stone. This sense of incorporation and blending with harmony extended to the details of life in those urban settlements. People have picked up what they saw in their built environment into their own relationships. And architecture was able to create terms for city life, namely a place for people, nature, and economic activity to thrive, not mere boxes capable only of encapsulation. In order to better understand the manifestation of those qualities I'm talking about, I would examine with you 4 components of the city. The religious sites, the commercial spaces, housing, and the natural environment. Starting from the religious sites, we could say that we not always witness, the presence of buildings representing multiple religious faiths as a sign of harmony and reconciliation. Some argue that the presence of those multiple religious structures can also be read as a sign of antagonism and competition. However, in Syria, the adjacent mosques and churches were connected by new main streets and alleyways. There was a context for this. They were never set apart, isolated, or imposed. They were connected to the life of the street. People were living among, underneath those buildings, mimicking the nature, like the lemon and olive tree that shadowed those trees. So in this picture, you can see one of the oldest mosques in Homs, still standing, and it's called the Great Mosque of Al-Nouri. This picture, unfortunately, was taken after the destruction, after being hit, sustaining damages by the war. But you could see, I hope you could see from the picture that the mosque has. The mosque had incorporated different elements, so it has gone through a process of metamorphosis, a case that could be made general to most of historic locations in Syria. For example, in the case of the Al-Nouri, natural disasters, fire, and recently war have been causes to changes to the structure of the building. This building owes its final structure or shape to Nuruddin al-Zenki from the Mamluk Islamic era. It sits at the heart of the old city of Homs. Its location was part of the ancient temple of sun, while in the more recent times it had become adjacent to the city's protecting wall at one end and to the souk from the other end. Parts of its structure were built incorporating pillars from the remnants of the ancient temple. So this column that you see coming out from the wall, that wasn't obvious before sustaining damages. So the recent conflict, the recent hitting, exposed this column to come forward and show itself. And in this way, we could see that this is an ancient pillar belonging to a different era from the era that built the wall. In such a structure, the relationship with its surroundings and the people can be read by looking at the embodiment of certain values manifested aesthetically in the building's simplicity from one end and use of local durable materials, but also morally in the creation of a sense of no waste and the harmonious incorporation of detail without compromising character. About 200 meters from Al-Nouri lies another religious site, the Saint Mary Church of the Holy Build. The original underground church dates back to 59 BC. As you see here in the picture, this Roman cellar is still built underneath the church that was rebuilt as a black building in 1852 using the same building material as the mosque, the black basalt, which is the local famous building material in Homs, and it kind of displays the same austerity and serenity as the mosque, along with the same sense of incorporation of all the different layers of styles and building. On an urban scale, examination of such examples indicates that the Islamic architecture, which has shown itself to us through the architecture register, was not given to destroying cities. On contrary, on the whole, it allowed them to grow organically with a respect for the religious sites, and which was a part of the urban fabric as much as a part of a daily practice. Unfortunately, this didn't continue to be the case as modern churches were built on in modern times. One only has to take a look at the neighboring Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, which was rebuilt after its own transformation after civil war. And those mosques and churches built in Beirut now stand separated from their surroundings, cost a fortune to be built or rebuilt, and are alienated from people's lives. They are difficult to attend with their extravagant look and closed guarded doors. They are not protected as the old ones that you saw examples of. They are not embraced and rooted in the everyday life, either structurally or logistically. They are not situated to bring people together in the same way as those which used to cause people to cross paths or to create a pleasant encounter. They do not lead by example in their location, structure, or detail. Rather, they promote isolation as they stand proudly mere labels to mark out territories, where instead of seeing faces, the only thing you could see is the back of departing cars. Moving on to the commercial spaces, the marketplace, or the souk, as we say, as we use as an Arabic word, is a key component in the old city. The souk's importance stems from the fact that it is a productive public space, a place that should ideally be for negotiation and ethical commerce. In all major old cities, such as Homs, Aleppo, Damascus, The souk grew as an artery that connected the residential neighborhoods with the commercial space. Within and around its winding alleyways, it has spaces for leisure and culture, such as the hammams or public baths, schools, religious spaces, and workspaces. Each alley embraced a certain specialty, one for goldsmithing, one for blacksmithing, another for copper works. So this is a map that shows you the layout of the old souk network in Homs. Each color indicates, like I said, one vocation or one specialty. The fabric, textile, like I said, blacksmithing, coppersmithing, and so on. So thanks to the nature of this architecture, production took place in parallel with the retail business, with the right balance between the local and the imported. The souk, in the souk, people used to be able to come to shop, to gather at the hammam, to go to the mosque or the church nearby, or just to cross path, going to their houses and workplaces at the end of this route or that one. People could greet each other on the way. They passed by each other on their bicycles or on foot with their children. They saw each other's faces. They shook their hands and heard their voices. Maybe not very convenient for a COVID situation, but at those times they were times that everybody came together for the help and protection of their neighbors. In order to understand the effect of the mistakes and wrongs of the modern renovation and the new addition that was imposed upon such urban locations and constructions, clear evidence could also be visited or seen in Beirut, which I use for comparison because it was rebuilt. It went through the phase of reconstruction and rebuilding, which we have not yet. You could see that the new reconstruction of the old market or the souk in Beirut did not only change the nature of the place, but also its entire economic activity, social classes, and social interaction. An excellent study was which was published online in an article for the Architectural Association School of Architecture, if you want to check out, called Projective Cities Program, explained how the new design demanded a change in the size and configuration of shops and spaces of the souk. By changing the size of the expropriated properties, the souk was turned into a shopping mall. Owners became tenants, producers became vendors, and the relationship between the central market and the port city ceased to exist. And the relationship between the merchants and the city's inhabitants also died out, all to be replaced with elites, brands, and multi-level parking lots. Now, let me move on to the third element in the city, which is housing. In the old cities, all the old cores that we are discussing, people maintained their privacy along with livelihood of their cities. The sense of security was not imposed within those alleyways, rather it grew organically as a fruit of community-sustaining architecture. Different social classes and different religions were neighbors with a shared language of harmony that left little room for distraction in appearance. By looking at the outside appearance of a building like this one, you cannot tell that the owner or those inhabitants, you cannot tell if they are rich or poor. You cannot tell from which class they come from. Only until the colonial regimentation and vandalism wrought by the modernist architecture, this had to change. Housing in the modernized Syria can be divided now into three main categories: informal, social, and boulevard. Of course, we mentioned, apart from the old type or the old city type, this is a general image of how the city looks with the informal and social casted outside. Since the boulevard is too expensive and the social is too ugly and dysfunctional, most of the people resorted to the informal living that you've seen, and this could explain, partly could explain why 40 to 60% of the Syrian population lives in slums. The old city no longer can be accounted as a type of housing, as most of its structures were turned into touristic businesses and touristic attractions. The houses that remain in the old core are mostly disputed properties with problems of shared ownership and inheritance and so on. The jumble of conflicting legislation and the absence of preservation, or true preservation, let me say, had caused irreversible damages to the old structures in the old cores. But most importantly, it has led to the loss of social fabric and cherished privacy. This was handled by the government through presenting two different approaches: tourism to the old city and investment to the informal areas. In the old city, restaurants, cafes, and so on replaced the local production hives and safe havens of houses. While in the informal areas, new law, not new anymore, but it was issued during the years of war in 2018. And it's a very controversial law. It was called in the beginning Law Number 10. Presented the investment as a tool to regulate the informal areas after the war's chaos, or at least this was the slogan or the selling slogan that was used for this law. But the truth is, the law has stirred a lot of controversy among concerns of social engineering. But the real risk for me, in my view, of this law is the dictation of new terms of isolation. Because, for example, in 2015, an informal settlement in Damascus was referred to as the orchards, because it's an agricultural land that was used partly as orchards for production, for farming work, but also had buildings, informal buildings built upon. And the site was replaced by a project, a development project that was called Maruta City. What followed was the demolition of the informal buildings and the evacuation of residents to whom shares in the yet-to-be-built planned city will be granted as compensation. Remember, this happened during the years of displacement and war in 2015, where the need of housing and need of sheltering people was at its highest levels. But local architects were in a race to present their modern tower buildings. This is an example of one of the presented designs to replace the mess, so-called mess, of the informal houses and small businesses and farms. This is also an example of how the area should look like. Anyone can see that there is no way that the original residents will be able to afford back their houses and businesses. The whole community is replaced by a new elite that can afford the places basically as luxury housing. The area, despite the problems and all problems as an informality, was a productive part of the town with local farms and lush orchards. Unfortunately, all of this will be paved over and is being paved over. Another example is located in my city, Homs. Homs is the third largest city in Syria. It was among the first cities to erupt in violence in the events of 2011. And for some, Homs became what is so-called the capital of the revolution, with a heavy price of chaos, death, and destruction. Of over 60% of the city lies in rubble. So you will see now images of what it does look like till this day. This is a mass destroyed neighborhood in my city, which still stand in the same look as it is now. None of these had been rebuilt or fixed. So, but even before anyone hears of the so-called Arab Spring, Homs was raging for no lesser reason than an architectural plan. The mayor at the time was determined to transform the city into a coveted example of Dubai. He called his plan Homs's dream, and the Homsis in return called it Homs's nightmare. He basically wanted to replace this with this. And the fate of Homs had to face is unmistakably related to the way the city was transforming urbanly and architecturally. I speak in more detail about this in the book, but for now it's time to move for the fourth and final component in the city, which is nature. The industrial orientation of the modern image of Syria has led to great losses as around the world, but this is very seen in a very obvious way in the natural resources of Syria. Whether in factory building or in the use of car, this meant to sacrifice unprofitable chunks in the city, such as the river fronts. Like all ancient cities, the Syrian cities were built on water. The river in the internal city as an element of nature was incorporated into traditional architecture, just as the old pillars you saw in the Al-Nouri mosque, but also which used to pick up from where the previous civilization has finished. Alasi River or Orontes, the river of Homs, or the river that Homs was built on, it used to run in full force to water the orchards of the city, around the city and within the city, and flow into the city into irrigation canals. So Homs is built away from this river by 2 to 5 kilometers, and an irrigation canal brings the water to the city. This was for swamp management and so on from the old history of Homs. The river had productive structures built upon, such as the mills, and was also used for free collective leisure pursuits in the lush orchards surrounding its banks. Over time, the mills had been demolished. The free picnics have been curtailed by construction of new restaurants which occupy parts of the orchards and block the view. And the canals even have been damaged in many places and smothered by roads and pavements. And this is a process that I spoke about here in the lecture in the timeline of like I said, the French Mandate, and then followed by the 50s and 60s transformations. Not only in Homs, but also in other places such as Damascus. Rivers were smothered to be used as roads. And this is a picture that dates back to 1962. The river Barada in Damascus, which runs through the capital, was used by people in much the same way as the one mentioned in Homs. In the 1960s, however, the river was buried and covered by roads for cars to pass over, and the rest of it became a filthy stream of rubbish, as it is till this day. The cost of such ill-considered actions have been enormous, not only in the road network, suffering from traffic congestions and pollution, part of the problem created though by conjunction points with the old city, how to connect the new network, the new boulevard, French roads with the old alleyways. But also the problems are related to clean drinking water, that we've lost large chunks of it, and along with the irrigation needed for agriculture. More critically, people have lost yet another thread that used to connect them with their homes, with their cities and settlements. And for that, they lost part of their sense of belonging. I've only taken notice of this, of all those factors, and how the old city functioned, and the comparison between the old and the new, because of war, because the old parts, like those rivers, were too smothered. I couldn't see or take notice of those parts. However, not urbanly or architecturally. This made it almost impossible for people, especially from my generation, to realize the true value of those structures and those buildings. In 2014. My city, like I mentioned, was heavily under shelling. I used to hear the crumble of each building falling hit by hit from my window. It was also the time that I entered a UN habitat design competition, was aimed for the rehabilitation of mass and social housing around the world. The competition wasn't about Syria, and it wasn't about rebuilding. It was about a global problem. One that the cities around the world are suffering from, which is the lack of dignified housing. The competition asked for the international participants to offer creative solutions to rehabilitate the dysfunctioning and isolated social and informal housing models in their various cities. My proposal, which won first place on national level, it wasn't a design of rehabilitation, rather of rebuilding. At the time, the locality that I chose to study, called Baba Amr, was making a daily presence in the international news for the unprecedented violence on its streets, which was the mark that had changed the whole course of demonstrations and crackdown tensions into a violent civil war. Shortly after, the locality came out totally destroyed, completely evacuated, and shut down. My design relied on a study I did for the history and social makeup of the area and the economic means and activity available there. I chose the locality for my study because of the special complexities of the area. Being an area of informal and social housing first, and a locality of mixed rural and urban character, and thirdly, for combining a contradictory example of achieving connections with the city through craft and tradesmen works while still being segregated from the city life. I explain more about this dynamics, of course, in the book, but the planning of the site had to take into account some complex considerations. The lines of the infrastructure that included the city pipelines, the main pipeline for water and sewage in the city, were running through the locality in the shape of a big X, like the one you see in the middle of this plan. This couldn't be altered or touched, and to a large extent, it controlled the zoning of the site. Also, the locality is built on the peripheral area next to the orchards, and it is also kind of marked by the train railway. So there has been natural and industrial surroundings to take into consideration, and to take in consideration also the connection with the neighborhood that lies on the upper part of the plan. This is where the locality connects itself with the rest of the city. So the properties combined also different legal status between private, which is completely owned by the owners, and public, which is also completely owned by the government, and shared, which is a combination of the two. And according to which the heights of the buildings have varied depending on the building code. And finally, there has been the consideration of the agricultural nature of the surroundings farms, because most of the people, of the residents there, have farming land or work in a farming land, and in that sense, they have their residences should be close to the area where they work. This way, the site plan network was determined in consideration of modes of living and proximities between home and work. The history and creation of the locality, of course, is interesting, and like I said, it's discussed in a whole chapter in the book. But what matters here is that being designated as an informal area, it was turned into a site for a development project, which meant that this will be executed mainly by developers, where neither architects nor the policymakers bothered to dig deep to allow their designs to be relevant to the lives of people. That's why all similar cases in Syria look exactly the same and equally dreadful. Take a look at what the government had in store for rebuilding Baba Amr. This plan was issued in the same year, in 2014, instantly after destruction. This is the public or the government official adopted plan, if you can call it this way, and it is the one of the few projects that came out to the public eye of a destroyed area in the war. This is a very rare case. Obviously, it was a declaration of the kind of future awaiting those informalities after the war, which was confirmed with the issuing of the mentioned law number 10. In my proposal, I would like to think that I had a different vision. I tried to avoid the problems of the previous situation while keeping it relevant somehow to the lifestyle and traditions of the place. The tree unit, a unit made up of cluster of courtyard housing, where privacy and nature are the main focus. All courtyards should be, while open, protected from being viewed by other neighbors, including the windows of the other apartments or courtyard housing. The task was to reach this goal while maintaining the traditional setup of the apartments, and to create an urban unit that can unfold in four direction to connect with the mirrored units around. So in a kind of way, having four hands that could connect from each with the neighboring unit. Namely, to extend the architectural cluster, which is the tree unit, into an urban cluster through connecting with the unfolded surrounding units. In this way, the quality of growth was established, so it is not a literal reference to tree, rather, which you could imagine at first, but rather the quality of what trees do, which is growing. It can grow horizontally in an urban sense and grow vertically also in an architectural sense. That's how you may spot the conceptual difference between my design and the design of Mouchi Safari's Habitat 67 in Montreal. Some people made the connection by comparing those two shots, and I have to admit, of course, that at first sight they may appear very similar, but I see no real connection here, specifically because the two spring from two totally different concepts and understandings, and more essentially, they reach different outcomes in creation, adaptation, and design logic and organization. Let me explain more. My design is built on a unit able to grow, not randomly or accumulatively, rather intertwined geometrically and rooted in traditional culture. In fact, the real resemblance I tried to make and I was inspired by was to the street bridge, or as we call in Arabic, Sibat, which can be found in the old Islamic cities in Syria, and also you can spot even in places that I believe also were inspired by in Switzerland, for example. I saw one in Geneva. But I've always been fascinated by the structure and what impact it can make on the street view. The shade and light and the weather protection, as well as the design fluidity and flexibility in space making within the apartments. This was applicable in the tree unit when the apartments in neighboring units can exchange room space according to the determined size of the apartment. There are many lessons, of course, to take and draw from the old Islamic cities in Syria, in my view, and because it was successful in sustaining peaceful and establishing united terms of shared living for centuries. However, drawing those lessons from the old city should not be, of course, made in a nostalgic way, nor in a mere copy and paste approach, as unfortunately the case of many projects that refer to the region's culture, but rather to identify what was successful in those old cities and try to recapture that. What was unique in the old city was its ability to join the four components that we mention here in a coherent way. No component was left out or was overshadowing the other, rather collaborating in one harmonious whole. Nature was part of production, but also was respected and maintained. It also grew in houses and in trees. Housing was close to work and to the market, but in the same time, it was protected and private. The market was a place for both production and consumerism, a place for exchange and making profit, but built close to a moral anchor and a spiritual side. In its turn, the spiritual side also was part of people's lives, mediating between their homes and their public spaces and shared among all people. The architecture of such a place offered a special way of life in every detail it represented. The fruits of the courtyard tree that dangled in its branches over your house and the neighbor's house meant that you both can share and enjoy what you can pick up from this nature. The door of the mosque that opened in front of that of the church meant that you and your neighbor would extend your worshipping by extending mutual respect and shared love to the same place. The market that divided its spaces equally among different array of people inspired collaboration instead of competition. The beauty of such places was both built and felt. And to rebuild this way, we must learn to achieve the two. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Okay. I think we're back. Thank you. I have to say I'm really impressed. This lecture was very precise and very detailed and fantastic lecture on the city of Homs. Thank you. Thank you, Marwa. Are you with us? Yeah, she's here.
Yes.
And I welcome Mark also, Mark Angelil. He, at the moment, he is not in Zurich, but he joins us from LA in the United States via Skype. So we're all here now on this platform. And now of course, the audience, now I invite you to ask questions in the Q&A channel. So, or it's called F&A, Fragen und Antworten, or question and answers channels. You can please type your questions. I will read that to Marwa and she can hear it and will answer it, but she can't read it because she's not on Zoom. And while we are waiting, of course, I think I would love to start and come up with my first question, summarizing a bit this lecture. You showed very clearly in the case of Homs that the urban policy and planning in Syria, which was introduced under the French mandate, led to division and control of land, and as a consequence, as you showed, reinforced social class divisions and created segregation and isolated neighborhoods. So colonial planning caused unsuccessful social housing schemes. This is an experience that we know also from other countries. How can we rebuild in a way to contribute to the practical, social, and the economic aspects of people's lives in Homs, but also in developing countries or countries in crisis? This is one of the major challenges today.
Yeah, well, that's true, Marie. I think it's a global challenge, as well as, like you said, like you mentioned, a challenge for the developed countries and countries in crisis. But if I would like to start from how I look at the role of architecture in that term, in you know, because as architects we know that we provide people with shelter, basically, and so any human being would need a roof over their head, and they need viability. They need, like you said, economic viability for people for the process of life. And in order to secure those two things, the viability, the economic viability, and shelter, you need a society to support and collaborate and reinforce those. So in that sense, the health of the society, how you bring people together is in essence what makes people settle down. So I think that the mistake that urban policies made basically is to look at everybody as a middle class urbanite. So they look at everyone as you know, providing one size that fits all. And what I discovered while studying a local case, which is my city, Syria, I discovered that this is the case after the publishing of the Battle for Home, that this is a global case, that every urban policy basically look at settlement in from this lens, which led me into writing a new book, which will be out, I hope, very soon in April 2021. I tried to look at settlement from the three types of settlement: the urban and the rural and the nomadic. So I think changing this mistake, you know, starting from from correcting this mistake, from looking at settlement as a diverse and diverse process, that you have different types of people, different types of settlement. This I think is the first step towards reconstruction and rebuilding, but also towards correcting mistakes that even developed, like countries that are rich and wealthy, like in Europe and America, it's a mistake that is happening on a large scale, and correcting this mistake could lead to healthier, let's say, urban policies.
So let me jump in. First of all, thank you very much for your lecture. It's fascinating. And also thank you very much for your book, which I read in preparation of today's meeting. And now I'm hearing that you're working on another book. So I'm really excited about it. While you were talking, I was wondering whether Athena, beyond being the goddess of wisdom and handicraft and craftsmanship and warfare, whether Athena was an activist as well. So this is one of the things that was going through my mind. But maybe we return to this in a second. At the very beginning of your book, you mentioned that buildings do not lie. Okay? And I thought this was a very provocative statement. Let me expand upon that for a second. Do you think that architecture or buildings or urban settlements can take sides? Okay? I mean, that's, I'm talking about the position taking it. And I give you an example. Through your narrative, both in your lecture and in your book, you're very critical of architecture as a destructive force. Before the war, with colonization, and also what happened later on, or not always under the banner of modernizing, basically this modernizing effort, sometimes even with an eye on Dubai, would destroy the city. Then during the Civil War, okay, which started nearly 10 years ago, which led to the literal demolition of your cities. And lastly, as you pointed out with the case of Beirut, there's another wave of destruction waiting in the wings, so to speak, namely the one associated with the rebuilding of cities in Syria after the war, making architecture accountable for what might happen. So if architecture doesn't lie, does architecture take sides?
Well, I think if you look deep, they don't lie in the sense that you will discover the story behind every building, behind every creation. But in terms of, if you are asking about policies, of course there are policies with political space. The strong and strong leaders will reinforce their positions by building great buildings, by building things that could make their presence permanent in the shape of building. Since the ancient civilizations, you could see it in the pyramids, for example. So, of course, architecture is used as a political tool, but they don't lie in the meaning that if you look at a building, you will see immediately what is the meaning behind it. You will see that this building is used to reinforce power or to demonstrate authority. You will see that this building is a sign of inequality, and this street is a sign of divisiveness. In this sense, they don't lie. They are signals to our way of handling space, of our way of handling society as well. So no, I don't think they take sides in the meaning that they can deceive you. But if you look at the signal with open eyes and open mind, you will see the meaning behind it. But of course, they are there for their existence is to, like I said, to leave an impression, and this impression could be deceiving, could be political, like I said.
We have two questions from the audience.
So I would share your opinion that buildings do not lie, that they are very transparent.
Mark, can I jump in and announce that later on we have two questions? But sorry, finish your sentence. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so there's a question, actually two, from Jennifer Doyne. Thank you. She's writing. Thank you for this great lecture. I have two questions. First, it seems that the whole reconstruction of Syria is considered a task for developers building for the rich. What are the plans, housing finance mechanisms for the lower middle classes and the poor? And the second question, in Europe after World War II, a housing cooperative had a key role in reconstruction and made it possible to rehouse displaced people through bottom-up self-help approaches. As a part of your beautiful project, have you also thought about how, by whom reconstruction could be done? What could be the role of the people? Is there a debate about these issues in Syria?
Well, thank you, Jennifer, for your questions. In terms of the mechanisms that are here for enabling the poor, there are none, because Syria at the moment, you could say that it's a dead country basically, because everything has stopped and we live in a very dire situation, economic situation. So what had followed the conflict and the battling in cities like mine and other neighboring cities, which were destroyed by the conflict, but we are now living in peaceful, let's say, times. We don't have any more battling in our area, in our city and region. The economic situation is very difficult. Our economy had collapsed, and we have lack of every kind of service. We have a lack in fuel. People queue for days now to get their cars filled. So instead of reconstruction, people are just queuing to get their basic amenities and basic needs. And I think maybe you've heard that last year the UN had published a report about Syria that 83% of the Syrian population live below the poverty line, which makes us the poorest country now in the world. This is a new phase for Syria. A decade ago, before the war, it wasn't the case. Syria's debt, the national debt was zero. So the country had a wealth of agricultural products and crops, and people on the whole, maybe in generally, they had jobs, although the situation was difficult for them, but none of that is happening now. So in terms of reconstruction, we are in a dilemma. We are a country that is surrounded with foreign interests, let's say. So we have many foreign powers fighting over a piece of cake here. And in this tension, the Syrian population and the Syrian reconstruction are just on hold. They don't. Our lives are on hold. So, although the mechanisms usually are to enable the rich, unfortunately, even this at the moment is absent. So, there is nothing that is enabling anybody. Basically, what I want to say. In terms of the second question, she mentions the cities in the wake of the World War II. I don't agree that the European cities were had a utopian situation. I think that the industrialization of architecture and urbanism effectively started in the aftermath of the World War II. And I think the switch or the shift towards the current situation that we live in globally could be traced to that moment, the moment that everything had to be taken to the mass production scale, and architecture was one of the crafts that was transformed into an industry by that time. And I think the European city, although I'm not an expert, but I think that European city, had changed into a place of a touristic center, a center that sacrificed itself to the wealthy, basically, because it was sold to those who have, has the higher bid, basically, and people had to go to the social housing instead, which generally is a place that is far from work, far from the center, and there is a mortgage to pay. So I don't think it's a very good case to look after for. I think the situation globally needs a rethink.
I think what she was putting on the table. Sorry, she was putting the role of housing cooperatives. Housing cooperatives which are not state-owned housing or social housing, and she was asking if this could be. Yeah.
Marie, can I try to negotiate here?
Yes.
What was interesting about Jennifer's question was that she suggested to Marwa that maybe your 4-point program, which is extremely exciting, about reconsidering religious sites as something that could become, a connecting network in the city, the role of commercial space and nature and water infrastructure. What Jennifer suggests is maybe economic and social models should be added to this list. Yes. In order to truly empower design. Okay, so I think making with your 4-point program, if you had to expand it, I think one possibility would be to go along Jennifer's question.
Yeah. Yes, I think you're right. Yes, I think. I agree.
So in this. Within this framework, what interests me while reading your book and looking at your lecture is that you are drawing. Okay, you're not only writing words, you're also drawing, and you use your pen as if to listen, as if listening with your pen to what is happening on the ground. And additionally, and this became very clear at the end of your lecture with your Habitat project, you deploy drawings to design, okay, to create alternative futures, which you reinforced with your 4-point program. So now what would interest me is how can design be truly empowered? Okay, knowing that, real estate agents are waiting to fall on the cities and turn it into another development project. What is the role of drawing in this effort to be an activist like Athena and to truly achieve something?
Well, I think, just to wrap up very quickly, that I think part of Jennifer's question is partly the answer. Like she mentions the debate with people. I think this should be empowered, that bringing people to the table, but also the role of philanthropy. So I believe that philanthropy, in maybe it's kind of like collaborative or cooperative housing, something that the rich part of the society, the rich individuals in society could do voluntarily, contribute into helping bringing design, good design and like you said, the social design into the reality.
May I mean, this is a challenge. I have 2 more questions pending.
Yeah.
Are you ready for the next question?
Yes.
Evelyn Althaus, she's writing, thank you for this inspiring lecture. 2 questions. In your project for reconstruction, which kind of places do you intend for people to meet, and with which materials would you like to work?
Well, the first 2 types of buildings or locations that come to mind are libraries and parks, because I think those 2 are venues to not only bringing people, but bringing people productively, like kind of bringing people to the nature and bringing people to culture. So I think our cities won't have too many parks or too many libraries. And in terms of materials, I'm all in favor with the local materials, because they involve a network of vocations, of crafts. So not only you are working with a material that is sustainable because it's local, it's more efficient, and but also it has the aesthetic familiarity to people, but also as well as having other, like I said, local crafts that are involved. For example, masons would be involved if you bring in local stone, and if you have also local wood, you'll have the craft, the carpenters, and so on.
So what's exciting about this, this is another recommendation of how to expand on your 4-point list. Okay. Which, don't take me wrongly, I really like these 4 points, but I think they need to be expanded. And the question suggests that public spaces and public buildings, okay? I mean, if you say in parks and libraries, you have to say, so, the street, not just only for cars, but also a meeting place. And I think that the emphasis should be put on public. Because what I'm hearing about the souk story, that basically the souk has been privatized, becoming a shopping mall. So now the list, you have your 4 points: a religious site, commercial spaces, housing, nature, and then public spaces and public buildings, alternative economic models, and the construction of a social fabric. So I'm at 7 points.
Mark, you're completely inspired. I think this is a great talk, and a lot of people are still waiting because they want to contribute. I have another 2, and I will bring it
between me and Mark into another time, because it will take a lot of time. So we'll move on to the questions of the audience.
There's Dia Ibrahim. She's inspired. She's currently reading your book. And also another question from Britta Henschel, and both are wondering about the situation now in Syria. Is there a master plan? Does it look bleak? Are you hopeful for a better future? And is there a think tank of the urban future of Syria? Are you part of it? And then also, how do you get involved as a female architect? Does your gender, being female architect, matter in any way?
Wow, this is a list of questions. So thank you for Dia and Britta. First thing first, like I said, maybe I should give more context of how life is here. You have to think about the society in the aftermath of a civil war, not only a war, as in a state of illness or sort of like, because people are not only divided, but they are tired and desperate, most of them. So in that sense, the collaborative spirit, or that they are mentioning in their questions, which is vital to begin with any process. You have to have this team, this public spirit that pushes forward good solutions and asks the right questions. Basically, we don't have this. Basically, the spirit, the public spirit, is no longer there. So, because, like I said, people are preoccupied with so many things, with a list of things like illness, and if I don't know where to begin, like the percentage of cancer here, and people are just, it's spreading, I think, more than COVID. It's just, people are so desperate and everything is collapsing. And in that sense, it's very bleak. Yes, it's very bleak, because the public institutions also are drowning with corruption, and every person is looking towards themselves. They have their private interest above any other interest. What we need is to reverse this. We need to have this sense of public spirit that puts the public interest above the self-interest. And am I hopeful? I have to be. Otherwise, I will no longer continue to live. And this is the I think the destiny of humanity, is to remain hopeful no matter how dark times looked. It's part of the game of life that you are met with difficulties, with bleak scenes, with dystopian situations, and you have to remain hopeful and hope for the best and work for the best. And I have to admit that I get tired sometimes, but I continue to encourage myself and people around me with this kind of mindset. What was
when
the question,
reading your book and listening to your lecture, one senses, a sense of desperation on one hand, and on the other hand, hope always comes through. And while reading, I was thinking of another activist, Martin Luther King, who in the early, at the Lincoln Memorial gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Okay? I have a dream that one day this nation will rise. And the question is how to turn a dream into action. Okay? The parity talks tomorrow about action and accountability. So yes, we need to dream. We need to be critical of a certain desperate situation. We need to dream. We need to have hope. But we need to translate that into actions. So what I'm hearing from both from Pia and Rita is what are the mechanisms that must be instituted. I mean, the first thing you did is you didn't leave Syria. Okay? Many people left Syria. So you stayed.
And they continue to do so, by the way. They continue to do so.
Yes.
Well, yes.
I wrote.
Are you?
Yes, I don't know. I mean,
Are you joining? Are you a collective? Are you kind of? Britta was asking, is there a think tank? And
no.
Another question. I think this also is because it's an Athena lecture. How do you get involved as a female architect?
Well, again, I don't know if I'm philosophizing this too much. I don't know, but in terms of gender, the way I see it is when society is turned into the jungle mode. So when survival is for what they say that survival is for the toughest or the strongest, and this happens when morality collapses and when we lose the sense of, like I said, the sense of public interest. And this is the mode, unfortunately, that we live by here. I refuse to live by, but I mean, this is the atmosphere. This is how things are being pushing forward in the sense of people are turning into, like I said, living into a jungle instead of a city or a country. In environment, it's not about gender, it's about who is considered weak. So if you are looked at as a woman, as a female, weaker than a man, then of course it's tougher for you. It's more difficult to get things forward, to engage with people, for people to take you seriously. And I've been through such situations. But I have to mention it happens to young architects as well, male architects, because age is considered also a weakness when you are like a new graduate. People won't take you seriously. And also when you are poor, for example, or you are not notable from the society. It's just, this is how those factors plays in. So I know, for example, that, an architect was a female architect who was, for some time ago, the head of the municipality, the mayor. And I don't think she had, to face, like I said, she was considered strong because she came from a wealthy family and she was supported by wealth and being notable or coming from a big family. And in that sense, gender becomes insignificant. Whereas, like I said, I mean, as a young graduate, you will, even if you are a male, dealing with, let's say, workers in site, the workers won't take you seriously. So it's matter of, I think it's a matter of morality in society. When society takes morality as a value and don't function in the jungle mode, I think gender becomes insignificant.
Yeah,
I hope
this was an answer. Thank you. Maybe to pose another last question from my side, and we don't have any open questions from the audience. And looking to the time, maybe let me ask just one more. In your book, The Battle for Home, you were quite critical towards architectural education in Syria and fellow architects and planners in the professional system. You also stress the importance of intertwining of the social and the built environment in your work. Now, talking about dreaming, but also, being realistic, how do you think and how do you wish that architecture should be taught in our present times and in the future, considering global challenges like conflict or war, migration, growing social divide, just to name a few?
Okay, well, let me just make a quick remark about the idea of dreaming and, what is my position from this? Mark mentioned the word activist twice, I think, and in that sense, I don't look at myself as an activist. I look at myself because I think activist, which is a very good thing, but activists have feelings more than, engage with their feelings more than with the plan or plan of action. And in that sense, I think as architects, we are more of, our mentalities are more towards problem solving. And in that sense, we always have to think about implementation. Otherwise, it's just dreaming, like you said. How do I look at architecture education? I think, in one word, I would like to see that architecture taught as a craft instead of more than an industry. I know that industry is a huge part of our craft, but I think it become too much involved in our craft because it turned basically architecture into building industry. And that's why we see the role of architects is being marginalized more and more in projects. The bigger the project, the more the architect's role is marginalized, and the developer and the building company takes over. So I think the education of architecture should focus more about how to make architecture as a craft and how to engage the imagination and dreaming phase, which is vital for students. I want, the 5 years that I studied architecture and dreamt about projects I will never have the chance to build, or maybe I will have, I don't know, but architects have this precious time of letting their imagination wild and dreaming about spaces and big projects that they may or may have not the chance to see. But in parallel to this, I think engaging with craftsmanship and with workers and with site building is vital, and we need to see more of this in the educational process of architecture.
On the issue of the architects as an activist or not, I mentioned the word twice indeed, because you mentioned Jane Jacobs as an activist. And I thought, maybe I should read your book through the lens of Jane Jacobs, and then I would see you as an activist. But whether the label is correct or not is not the issue. The issue is through your book, I hear between the lines, and then sometimes it's clearly expressed that we need to empower design. And if we need to empower design, this has to come into the education system. This is what we need to do at the university, not just do beautiful drawings. I think we still should do that, but the designs should have the power to truly be accountable and lead towards action. And this is the theme of tomorrow's conference.
Okay, great.
I don't want to leave you without, there's one more question really from the audience, and this is the very last. And we go back to Syria. Rami Msalam is writing, "Thank you, Marwa, for the informative lecture. I actually come from Aleppo, Syria, and it's very inspiring to hear about your story. I think Syria must be rebuilt in a collective way. Even if new houses are built and accommodation is available, people lack this sense of community. I think we need people to push the society to build itself, because not the UN and not the USA are going to build to Syria. Do you think there's a ground or a potential for such a development to happen anytime in the future?"
Well, I don't know about the future. What I know, I know about the present, and because the future could be altered any moment. 10 years ago, we didn't have war, and now we have war. So maybe also 6 months ago or 7 months ago, we didn't have a virus that locked everybody at home, and now we live in alternative reality. So I don't think anybody could predict the future. It could be drastically changed by a blink of an eye. But I think that Rami is right about his description about the situation and about the importance of having local collective forces that could build. But in order to have, back to the action plan again, in order to have this, instead of dreaming about it, we have to have a program that educate those forces. We have to have programs that also train those forces, because we lost so much of the workforce. We lost so much also from the academia. And like I said, the country is paralyzed at the moment. So my only hope is that there is enough voices that pushes the interference of foreign powers and more also hands that come into enabling the grassroots and enabling the programs of education and training in locally. But this is only a hope.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This was really kind of on a big tour with you. Thank you, Marwa, for being so serious about answering all the questions and sharing your thinking with us. I think this was a very inspiring evening, actually, and an eye-opener also. And I hope we continue this discussion, because the evening is far too short and the technical equipment now is, I think, at the edge.
Yes.
For me, I'm waiting for the new book to come, and then I hope we can invite you, and you once will be in Zurich and give a lecture in person. And
I hope so.
And I also want to have Mark then here in Zurich for the next debate.
Yes. We have a long conversation between me and Mark, waiting.
We could do it in Arabic.
Yes. Do you know Arabic?
Yes, of course.
Oh. Well, I didn't know. Yes, I'm more and more looking forward to it. And I thank you so much for hosting me, and thank you so much also for all the students that stayed and sticked around for such a long time online. And thank you for the team, the technical team that helped us. And thank you, Marie, for such an engaging conversation. And thank you, Mark, as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
very
Marwa.
much. Looking forward to meet you.
Yes, we had 120 people in the audience. So thank you very much. I think this was a very good start for the Athena lecture. And yeah, you'll be.
Yeah.
I will ask you for contact on Facebook for sure. No, I want to keep contact with you. I'm really following your work. Thank you very much. So I will.
We'll stay in touch. Bye.
I will.
Bye.
Good
luck.
Goodbye.
Good luck with the
I will stop the screen sharing and just shortly announce the program of the parity talk of tomorrow. So let me see. Goodbye, Marwa. Goodbye, Mark.
Goodbye, Marie. Goodbye, Mark. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Next one is here. Okay, now I share hopefully I share the program. Okay. So for tomorrow, the parity talks will start in the morning. Our rector, Sarah Springman, will give a welcome note and introduce into the parity talks at 9. Please don't miss that. And please stay during the day and engage in one of the workshops. You see the program now, and it's also online. And I thank you all for being with us and sharing this lecture and this evening. And now have a nice evening and the rest of the evening. Thank you. Goodbye.